Hi, my name is Margaret Moreton. I am the CEO at Gender and Disaster Australia, and by background I have a doctorate in disaster resilience from the ANU and have a long history now with working on resilience and gender related issues. It is so important to talk about climate justice with a gendered lens. I hadn't realised until I'd got into this work how significantly different people are affected by the impacts of a disaster based on their gender. It's one thing to, and it's difficult and traumatic to lose a home, to perhaps lose employment because you now have to focus on looking after the family. There are so many gendered impacts. Men are traumatised. I've sat with men through my own research who have been traumatised by their experience of a disaster. Women lose their lives. Women are violently assaulted because of their gender in a disaster context. These are appalling situations. So we cannot assume equity in our society. Lots of people I meet would like to think that it's an equal society, but it isn't. So marginalised people, gender, people with lower socioeconomic benefits and resources, gender is all through that. We have to think of this as a gender crisis as well as a climate crisis. One of the interviews that will stay with me for the rest of my life is an interview I had with an emergency services person, a man, who was the lead on his truck in a fire scenario, and they were called on the radio to pull out. The fire was exploding in front of them and they were going to be unsafe. So he was pulling his crew out by truck, and they passed a home where a man and a woman were hosing their house. And he pulled on that siren and he screamed out at them, "Hop in." I'm going to paraphrase. I think he swore, "Hop in, you can't beat this fire." She dropped her hose immediately and said, "Thank God you're here, let's go." Turned to her husband, who said, "No, no, no, darling." Put his arm in front of her. "We've got this, we'll be fine." And the fiery had to keep driving. He had his crew to save. That couple died. He knew they died, and he was crying beside me years later, still traumatised and going through a process for himself of, I should have clocked that bloke on the nose, I should have grabbed her. And I said to him, if you'd done all of those things, you all might have been lost because it would have taken time. And if you'd saved her and not him, she may have sued you and your emergency agency. It's a nightmare. But she died because she wouldn't leave him, and he died because he felt his job was to protect the home, and they didn't need to. And that story carries with me every day. Gender, right there. Gendered expectations they both had of each other, and they died. And their children and grandchildren were devastated. There's an advertisement that runs on TV at the moment, and I really don't like it, so I get cranky. The advertisement on the TV is about leaving early, and from memory the woman is sitting on the couch, the kids are around playing, the husband's looking out the window, and she says something like, "It's going to be a catastrophic day tomorrow, darling." And then she stops. And then in his mind, which we see in the advert, I think he might say it's okay, and then he goes through a possible scenario that they're in the car and that it's too late and the fire's everywhere and they're trying to leave and it's dangerous and perhaps they're not going to make it and perhaps they are. And then he turns from the window and says to her something like, "Perhaps we should leave early." And then there's the tagline from whoever sponsored that ad saying, "Leave early." And it makes me angry because she was there way before he was, but waited until he got there. How about the ads say, I think we should leave, darling, and how about he say, what a good idea, let's go. How about that for gender? It's just, we're still doing it. And when I raise that advertisement with colleagues and friends, someone will say, oh, but that's progress. At least we're saying leave early. I'm so sick of small steps. Big steps, please, media. So there are a few ways we can put gender right in the middle of the whole disaster situation. And the first is that in all of our planning mechanisms, we need women in the room. We need women, we need LGBTIQA+ people, we need them in the planning committees, we need them driving. We have a saying in gender disaster that if we make it female friendly, then it's safe and friendly for everybody. If women feel welcomed, everyone will feel welcomed. That's our experience, and that's kind of one of our mottos. So in the planning, in the preparation, women need to be in the room. Then it's a question of making sure that those women are paid, they have the same voice as everybody else. So there's a process of bringing women's experiences into that conversation. It's interesting that gender is, particularly the role of women, is really strong in recovery. We're interested in doing a bit of research to document this, and we're speaking at a couple of larger events in the coming months where I'm going to showcase this. Women are absolutely front and centre in recovery. And in my view, it's partly because recovery is poorly funded, recovery is not planned for, so women stand up when an event is either completely resolved or becoming resolved, and start to self-organise. They do the unvalued, invisible, unpaid work to build recovery. So women are actually all over recovery, but what I want to do is make sure that those women are paid for their work in recovery. And organisations like health networks and community sector groups, simple things like libraries, community houses, they all activate, but rarely are they given additional funding for the extra work they'll do. So in a strange way, they are already front and centre in recovery, but not recognised for the huge work that that involves. Women who run organisations that are heavily involved in recovery are asked to do so based on the funding they already receive. And we know the workload goes through the roof after disaster because people present with so many more complex issues. The one thing that I'm particularly focused on for my organisation's part in this is to expand our training program so that we, in the ideal world I want to live in, every volunteer, every emergency responder, every relief worker is gender aware. So if I can get training even halfway there, I want all of the Red Cross, all of Disaster Relief Australia, all of the Salvation Army, every local community house, every community service to be really aware of the gendered impacts that happen in disaster so that they can take that into account when they deliver their service. If we could do that, I think the ramifications would be huge. We only reach a small percentage of the people I'd like us to reach. All of us in our personal lives, me as a grandmother, I'm just going to try and, I did it as a mother, I will do it as a grandmother. Try and make sure that every little girl and every little boy I have any influence over grows up with a more balanced view of how the genders can work together. Everyone can do that. Gender inequality becomes apparent really early in a crisis. So when a fire is unfolding or a flood is unfolding, a cyclone, I'm now thinking of all sorts of examples I have. The first way it appears is that women are often stuck in a dangerous situation because they're caring for somebody. So whether it's someone with a disability, whether it's small children, whether it's an older parent, the woman is more likely to be in a property caring for that person. Sometimes there's one vehicle in a family and the vehicle will not be there because the vehicle has gone with the partner who might be volunteering to fight the fire, or and so this woman with caring responsibility is stuck in a dangerous situation without being able to leave. That's the very first thing, which obviously places her life, the life of those she's caring for, under greater risk. Then there's a whole series of things that happen that are more likely to happen for women than they are for men. So women sometimes will take leave from their workplace, or they might give up their casual employment because they've got to help the children adjust, or they've got to be supportive at home, kids start having nightmares. There's all this caring load that women carry from the get-go. It's not that men don't feel trauma. I've met many men who are traumatised by these events, and at Gender and Disaster Australia, I want us to be addressing all of these gendered implications. However, even when a man is traumatised by the experience that he's been through as well and that the family's been through, it's usually the woman who tries to care for that trauma, or might experience the violence that happens, or experience the consequences of increased alcohol consumption. We have statistics that say that alcohol consumption in an affected town is often 30% larger after the disaster than it was before. That's a lot of self-medication happening. So because of their caring responsibilities, it begins very quickly that women are carrying a load. Women do carry the caring load, and it's the most significant impact they have. Lots of women feel an obligation to not only care for their own family, but to care for their community and to connect with others. So this is a huge emotional load that women carry. There's some research which I've only just started engaging with that talks about the physical health implications from disaster as well as the mental health, and how things like presentations at hospitals go up in the 6 months after a disaster. So I need to get more across that sort of information. I'd like to know whether there's a gendered element of that, whether men or women are presenting more or less. There are lots of questions about gender and how it plays out after a disaster that I'm very keen that we do more research and more analysis on. I hadn't thought about that, presentations to doctors and hospitals. I know through some of the men that I've interviewed before, they really put off talking about it, seeing a doctor about anything that if they're not sleeping. They do self-medicate with alcohol more than they go to the doctor for, and they certainly don't go to a psychologist for support in listening to them. The number of times I've been in a community where they know that I don't live there, and that when I've done the research, I'll go home. And so men will tell me things, then they'll say, I haven't talked to the wife yet. And I'll say, so that might be a good idea. Yes, I think it probably is. I'm talking to you first to see how it goes because I know you'll leave, which is really interesting. And sometimes the counselling services that come, they come and stay for a while, or they might be local. And there's that question of, do I really want, I grew up in a small town, do I really want to be talking to the local? No, I don't actually. I'd rather talk to a complete stranger, or I'd rather drive 2 hours and say I'm going to the dentist or getting the car fixed. So we women tend to talk to each other more easily. Men find that a little bit more difficult, and yet if they hang on to it, it also has other health implications or relationship implications. So these are complex issues. So based on my experience, the thing that makes the biggest difference in terms of your outcomes after a disaster, at its broadest level, is the same regardless of your gender. whether you're male, female, or LGBTQIA+. And that is connections with other people that you trust and who trust you. The social capital, the relationships are what gets people through. And you don't have to have lots of them, but if you have one or two people, ideally before the event, but sometimes you form those, particularly if you're a man and you haven't got a lot of relationships like that, sometimes you can form them during and after, in the immediate aftermath of an event. But the thing that people talk to me most is if I've got someone I can talk to that I trust, that helps more than anything. The other thing I would add, I've just been reminded of a story from Tasmania. Sometimes it can be a complete stranger, so kindness is so important. If I can just tell you a quick story, a school was burnt to the ground, a primary school in Dunelly in Tasmania. And it happened just, I think it might have been Christmas Eve, I can't remember the precise date, but all the trees were up, all the decorations were up, all the presents were under the trees, and most of the town burnt down. Some woman somewhere on the mainland thought ahead, and she handmade, and I'm not talking glitter gun, I'm talking delicate handmade. I saw one and refused to hold it because it was so precious to the person who showed me. Christmas decorations. She made enough for every kid in the primary school to get one just before the next Christmas, because she knew the anniversary would mean that those children would remember. She sent a huge box to the school and they had a ceremony the next November where everyone got to pick one and take it home. The kindness of that woman, who no one knew the name of, the kindness of strangers is also really important alongside a relationship with friends or someone you can speak to. So I think it's the humanity that gets us through anything. The communities that I'm aware of where I would say no recovery is a delight because there's always pain and loss. That's part of the process. But the communities where I would say they are handling recovery really well accept and acknowledge the pain and the loss and encourage people to talk about it, and also find ways to have fun. So, you know, community dinners or concerts or just, you know, there was an Indigenous woman up in the Lockyer Valley who talked to me about a teddy bear hospital afternoon where all the kids had damaged toys, and lots of them apparently had teddy bears. And so they got to bring their teddy bear that they'd pulled out of the muck to the hospital for the afternoon. Not really a hospital, a community centre. And women, again, repaired them. And so Teddy got a new arm or got new, you know, pockets and the kids were thrilled because they'd been frightened, obviously, and they got their teddy bear repaired. So it's the way of finding creative, caring opportunities that are a little bit left field, but people hold on to that and remember it. And those teddy bears became extra special because they'd been repaired. Things like that, you know? It's the matching of a heart need, recognising loss and grief, but also looking forward and, you know, in some metaphorical way, manifesting recovery and the future. They're the things that really work. And there are examples all over the country of doing things like that. The voice that is, there are a few. The few voices that are really missing from the disaster conversation, be it preparation, be it response, be it recovery, it's all smushed together really. Those phases don't work for me anymore. But at any stage, before, during or after, First Nations people do not have a strong enough voice. There's quite a few programs at the moment going where women, First Nations people, multicultural backgrounds, LGBTIQA+ people, where organisations like mine, we're all advocating for greater inclusion of those voices, because it's those voices that bring the compassion, the balance, the creativity, the care. And we need to not only include the voices in the planning and the delivery, but we need to fund and recognise the value of the work they do. So something I'd really like to see change in my lifetime is that we value that. We invest in that, we welcome it, we pay for it, and we follow the advice it gives.